Welcome listeners to Tipperary Town Memories, a project featuring local people recalling memories of growing up and working in the town. This oral history project, with the support of Creative Ireland and Tipperary County Council, seeks to preserve memories from the 1940s to the 19s, approximately. We invite you, the listener, to enjoy this trip down memory lane. Now, Kathleen, you're very welcome. Kathleen Cleary, that's Kathleen Coughlin. Mm-hmm. And Kathleen, you lived in Ula, but Tipperary Town would have been your town for shopping.
That's right.
And you're going to kind of give us a whirlwind tour of the shops that a lot of people listening are going to recall.
Right.
So maybe you'll do that now.
Oh, yeah. So our trip to Tip, so that's a day out in Tipperary, not the Féile and Thurles. It was a big day out for us as children in the late 60s. So we more than likely got the CIE bus around 2 o'clock. The bus dropped us at the door of Ramey Sampson's betting office in Bridge Street. That was a busy place and mostly male customers. Corcoran's first shop was on the opposite side of the street and O'Brien's pub, and further down the Royal Hotel. O'Halloran's at the corner where the Africa shop is now. Murnan's was a thriving ladies' shop. McGilligan's menswear further down, and Unstad for all your books and stationery. Then you had the smell of fresh bread wafted from Kylie's, Tressy's pub, Ryan's Butchers, and the arcade, that was Mrs. O'Dee's ladies' wear. O'Dwyer's chemist was near English's ice cream parlour. And who didn't love English's ice cream? Soft, creamy, just delicious. And on a special day, a child might be lucky enough to be treated to a sundae. Well, that was a dream come true. McMahon's had modern shoes, and Jimmy Whelan was well known for the home-cured bacon. O'Connor Brothers sold everything, paint and paper, all combinations of delf and ornaments, carpets, rugs, and anything else required for the household. Lil Moloney had a draper shop near the arch. Now, the display window was packed. It was like as if there was a sample of everything that she had in stock there. And I suppose in modern speak, or as Francis Brennan might say, the window was too busy. Now, many children then were photographed across in Connolly's chemist. So these photos were framed and they were hung in the good room at home. So the child was either sitting or standing beside the old-fashioned chair. Now, Joe Whelan possibly started his retail career in the shop, which was later the ESB shop on Main Street. But I've a clearer memory of him in Main Street, him and the staff in the green coats. Daly's and Coleman's, who I believe had the first self-service shop in town, Mackey's newsagent, and then the penny farthing bicycle outside Evans, Kisan's chemist, the Crystal Cleaners, Dennehy's leather goods, and at the corner then of Main Street and Davis Street was Kathleen Kelly's, ladies and baby wear, and a fabric shop downstairs. So around the corner then, you had another stationery shop, Falvey's, Fitzgibbon's Butchers, and the ladies' only shop, Miss Maher's. Now everything was boxed and neatly stored and handled with delicacy, respect and care. It was shown to the customer, it was just raised up out of the box, and then it was rewrapped in tissue paper and returned to its box. And then on the opposite side of Davis Street was Jimmy O'Shea's, the sweet shop, and Hennessy's Bookies, that's where the Shamrogue is now, James Ryan, the chemist, we all remember that, the Provincial Bank, and O'Kelly Drapery, and Ryan Corrigan's had a pub and an undertaker's. Hennessy's plumbing supplies, Mabs are in that building now,
Oh yes.
and McMahon's chemist was then at the corner, so that was there forever. Then going up the street, we had the old technical school, and that was later the Irish House. We had the wonderful, gorgeous China showrooms, O'Dee's Menswear, O'Doherty and O'Dwyer Garage, Jim Corby's Pub, the Post Office, Bank, Ideal Tailoring, Willie Kinane, God be good to him, Costigan's Bookies, Dargan's, or we called that Darrigan's in Nuala, we always called it Darrigan's, the Pub and the Undertakers, your Kirby's Chemist, and then your Ronan's Shoe Shop, and they were all in Main Street, and it was a busy, thriving town. So then, when you turned round to Michael Street, you had the Nisha sisters, and they were very well-known jewellers in Michael Street, and they were so knowledgeable and, you know, unassuming. And if the Miss Mars handled their garments with care, the Nisha ladies appreciated the weight and the texture and the workings of even the cheapest watch. I don't know if any of you remember the mission box at Nisha's, where they had a mission box on the counter, and she mainly got the donations when someone swore in the shop. Then up in Bank Place, you had the 41 boutique, which is kind of a trendy enough place probably to go to. Hughes's Garage and Crowley's Drapery. A cup of tea or a lunch was available at the Galtee Cafe, where it was run by the Miss Quirks. I'm just noticing now, weren't a lot of the shops run by the Miss Nishas, the Miss Quirks, the Miss Mars?
That's right, yes.
You know, dedication of their lives.
And women had, I thought about that already, Kathleen, women had an important role in running businesses. Des Vernan's mother, Mrs. Vernan, another lady that ran a shop.
Yeah. And then I'm talking about Rafferty's Travel, gone, Heffernan's Hardware, Carew Wines, that's not occupied by Boyle Sports, O'Reilly's Hardware, that's Grace's, Lipton's, I think that's a Polish grocery shop now, or maybe some other.
Yes, Lipton's apparently were up at around the Maid of Erin originally.
Oh, were they?
Yes, way back in the time, and in the 1920s, when Moloney's chemist was, during the Troubles, was blown up, Lipton's went with it. And they relocated down to the main street. Isn't that interesting?
It is very interesting.
Yeah, someone told me that very recently.
Oh yeah, that's very. But then I was just talking there that when you were buying the wallpaper, you always had to get the shopkeeper to put it in the trimming machine. That was a very manual machine. So they trimmed the border. Remember the wallpaper came with two borders, but you only wanted one. But you had to know which side it needed to trim. Because if you didn't, when you went home, you had to go through each roll and sort of unwind it and cut it so dead straight, with a dead straight eye and a dead straight scissors. Now there was another lady shop then, Richard O'Brien's.
Yes.
Yeah, and Corcoran's
Dick O'Brien's, as it was known. Yeah, Dick O'Brien's.
Yeah, yeah. Then of course you had the Black Rock. And they sold ladies wear, men's wear, bedding, curtains, everything really. And they had a step in the middle of the shop. And I think everybody who went in there fell over that. And then, remember the sweet display in Woolworths? And the girls, they were all glamorous. But Woolworths had a bit of everything. But my memory of Woolworths is we bought these tiny little bottles of perfume. Now, I mean, it's probably wrong to even call it perfume, for 6pence. And we dabbed it on. We didn't even know. We didn't know the difference between that and Chanel.
No.
And we thought we were the bee's knees. Then I remember Harney's and the beautiful stationery. Just beautiful stationery.
And they sold tobacco.
Oh, they did,
and
yeah.
rosary beads and stuff
they
like
did.
that.
They did, yeah. And little presents for Holy Communion and confirmation and that. Yeah. Then your Duffners and Keane's were the jewellers. And the shoe shop then, as I've been speaking about, Bridget, you have Murray's Pub, and then you're down to Sheila's at the corner, where Ledbrooks now trade. And I know of some of the shops missing, and maybe I haven't some in the right order, but they're my memories, with help from family and friends, of a day out in Tip. So I hope you have enjoyed your tour of the town with me.
That's fabulous, Kathleen. That is really wonderful, and I'm sure it'll evoke So many memories for people. Now I want to welcome James Hayes, formerly from Gurtavoher, Glenvaharlow, born and reared. And James, you attended the fair days here in Tipperary town as a young boy.
Oh, I did.
Will you tell us a little?
Well, when I was 8 years of age, my father was stuck for, you had a wide mountain up there from the statue. There was no statue there then. That hill was bare and there was local minute of sheep and a few cattle on it. But you had to have someone to block the gaps, a runner. So I was missed school, sure I wasn't sorry, missed school. And off we went. I was only 8, but we arrived in town in along by Sandy Mountain, what is now the hotel there, just belonging to Mulcahy's, Miss Mulcahy. She used to breed Hereford cattle, and they had a old mill in Ardfinnan. She was a wealthy lady, and on we'd go we'd arrive at the back of the lino factory. We turn up then, and we turn again at the Abbey, above the Abbey School. Over and up, our perch was above at Hickham's Monument, where at the right hand side.
Costigan's
chemist shop, and any fair I went to, it was there we used to be, and then that first morning it was a black frost. Oh my God, it was cold. But we were young and we were hardy, and but a man was across the street from us. He had to pick up a truck. He was Sam Friday from Dundrum.
Oh.
And he said to my father, "There's an awful morning, there's that child out." Well, I hadn't any option, he said. But he's a hardy boy. Well, he offered me to sit into his vehicle, and it was the first propelled vehicle I'd ever had, only a pony and trap or an ass and car. So I was pure delighted. I was holding the steering wheel, and the man was happy as Larry when he put me into it, and I was happy. So I couldn't stop too long in it, because those animals had to be. So you soldiered on, you'd be lucky to get them.
Would they be milling around the street?
Oh, they'd be all over the place, and just clean up after it would be just desperate. Just desperate. The shopkeepers, I don't know how they put up with it, like. They had a fair green, but in my time it never happened there. But you'd have to drive them down, and then you'd have a ticket for the railway. You'd have a carriage ticket, and they'd be loaded onto it, and you'd get paid. You'd be hoping you'd get paid. I see my father holding the door of a car, and another man with him, 2 drivers. We're not certain that we're paid. There was one instance, it was told to me by a neighbour, of a man that carried 5 cattle, and he had a big family, and he never got paid for them. And they were 2-year-old cattle.
Of course, you wouldn't want to bring them home again without selling them, if at all possible.
Oh God, no, he brought them to sell them. But I remember going down to Dennis English's for getting an ice cream there and a cup of tea. And you'd go across into Danny Mackey's if you wanted a little book or what you'd call them, Desperate Dan.
The comic.
The comic, Desperate Dan, was very interesting at the time. It was for a young lad from the country, like it was something else.
Different
I
times.
was delighted.
Yeah.
Came home happy that evening, and then I was mad for other fairs. I remember going to Bancha, and we had no electricity. They had electricity in Bancha. We were just outside the parish. But Jim Breed was the first man to have a milking machine, and he had the lights turned on. But he was mad. He'd always be first at the table. No one had been front. This was November, like the darkness. So The poor old cattle, the hair stood on us all to try and stop them. They were totally mad to hear this noise, toot for the machine, you know. So luckily our neighbours were there and we kept telling them, and when they went to pass it in, we had a job to get in front of them. They were totally frightened. They'd never seen anything, only a chilly lamb, maybe, you know, and people didn't put yelling Kathleen at the time. They were all fed outside, so.
And
You can imagine the shock that
James, if a beast got away from you now in the town, how would you cope with that?
you had to try and cope with it yourself. As I said,
You're running after him.
the O'Neill man, he fell and he broke away at ourselves, a little heifer, and I followed her. 3 men tried to stop her, and they said, young fella, look at her off, she'll settle out the road. So we went searching in, everything was over. We went over that road to the right there. There's my nan's dad was working in the yard, and he came out. So he said told my father, John, I'll tell you, send word to you. So we came back in, then we had to turn for them. And there was, at the back of the barracks, it's still there, the green patch. The green patch is still there she was. So we had a job to hold, we had to try and get her up into the Royal Hotel.
Yes.
We got her in there to a little box there, they used to have a few cows and a pony and things. So they were my memories of it.
Thanks, James. Yeah. Now I want to welcome Phyllis Hickey, Phyllis O'Gorman. And Phyllis, you'll tell us a little bit of memories about Tipperary town that you would recall.
One of my fondest memories of my childhood is there was an elderly lady living down the road from us, Mrs. Hogan, and they were farmers, and her son would be in the meadow. Now he was the most handsome man you ever clapped eyes on. And Phyllis, when she was about 5 years old, I stuck my head through the neighbour's iron gate and they couldn't get the head back. So they had to saw the gate. 'Twas fell to poor Tom Hogan's lot to saw the gate. And my mother sitting with me on her lap to keep my head away from the iron bar.
Yeah.
Nanny Fitz the other side trying to talk to me. Phyllis screaming her head off and poor Tom trying to saw the gate.
And where did this take place? Where did you live? Where was
Out
home?
on the old road.
Oh, the old road.
And 'twas the neighbour's house, at least if it was our own house. But fortunately my father was a blacksmith, so when the gate was in bits as a result of my adventure, it was taken off and taken down to the forge to be repaired.
Oh, very good. So at least the day was saved. And did you come to school then in Tipperary?
I started school in the convent. I made lovely friends there and would still be quite friendly with people I went to school with. Other than that, it was a convent school and you wouldn't have the fondest memories. But I went to the vocational school then, down to Paddy O'Callaghan, Lord to mercy on the man. Absolute angel. If somebody in Tipperary wanted staff, they used to send to the vocational school. And Paddy, I'd swear he knew everybody in the school because he'd send for so-and-so and say, O'Keefe the vet is looking for a receptionist to go up there. You wouldn't have applied, you wouldn't have known, but he knew that you were the person for the job. He was just fantastic, you know. I worked in Limerick for a credit company, didn't particularly like it, and sure, then I met and married. I had known Kieran, but then we got married. We said we might as well be poor as the way we were. So.
But you had a business in town?
We had a business on the main street for nearly 40 years.
Wow. Will you tell me a little bit about that?
And it was dry cleaning, and it was a fantastic business at the time. When we were in business, it was a buzzing town. You know, anything you wanted, you got in town. But
and you're when you were in the dry cleaning business, Had you clients from outside the town?
Oh, very
as well
much
as
so.
the town?
I mean, they came, the one particular client comes to mind, she used to actually come out from Limerick. She used to come out for her dry cleaning, her magazines in Tim Green's, and she used to get her groceries in the L&N.
Right.
And she was coming out from Limerick. She said she couldn't be bothered with the hassle and the bustle. So out to Tip, and she loved it. She was a lovely person.
And where would you have gone to the dances then?
Drumkeen.
Okay.
Drumkeen would have been, you know, when we
Yes.
were at school, Drumkeen would have been.
Yes.
I remember going to Cashel on a few times as well, but that wouldn't have been.
And Dundrum then came on board as well, didn't it?
That would have
Going
been
away.
afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, that was later, and then that was more of a nightclub, wasn't it?
Was there great characters in town in your time? You were telling me a little funny story there first.
Two individuals in Tipperary, both of them had grocery stores. And one man was a bit griping, he wanted it all. So his neighbour decided to teach him a lesson. So one Monday morning, tomatoes, 2 shillings a pound. So the miserable neighbour saw this and went back and put up tomatoes 1 and 9pence a pound. So this went on all week until eventually tomatoes came down to 1 shilling a pound. This was gone beyond the ridiculous now. So the gripey neighbour went to his neighbour
Yes.
and said, now we have to stop this. We have to come to an agreement about the price of tomatoes. And your man turned around and said, sure, I don't sell tomatoes at all.
There was a sense of fun, wasn't there, in people?
Oh, very
you know,
much so.
That you'd be having the one in on somebody
Yeah.
or something. And, you know, there was no harm in it,
No,
was there? You
no.
know, it was just you know,
Yeah.
a bit of Kathleen, as they
That's,
say.
you know, but it's funny because I remember when we were in business, John Keane, Lord mercy on him, John would, he'd be going for his coffee, so he'd take a turn about the main street.
That's right.
And
yeah.
stick his head in everybody's door to know what was new and what was going on. And we had him in the morning at about 11, and come 5:30 in the evening, we had Michael Butler, Lord mercy
Oh
on him.
yes, the solicitor,
And,
yeah.
And Michael would ramble in, and Michael would tell you the history of a building, because he was born and reared in Tipperary, and he'd say, oh yeah, I remember that place now when it was such and such a thing, which was fascinating to listen to, you know.
Yeah. What was where the cleaners worked at? What was that?
We were
before?
part of Jackie Cassan's, and
yes.
it was a camera shop at one point.
All right.
And then the cleaners came in early, I think it was 1961, 62. And they were a company from Killarney. And they were there for a number of years, and Kieran was actually their manager. So then when they pulled out, Kieran bought the place, and hence the rest is history.
That's wonderful, Phyllis, and thank you so much for sharing.
Not at all, not at all.
Sharing that era and those memories with us. Thank you. Now we have Mick Murray, retired Garda. You came from Limerick and you came in 1968. So what was life like in 1968 in Tipperary?
Well, I can remember memories of the Mart came back to me because I came on the Friday and the place was chocker-block. Davis Street, you couldn't go up or down Davis Street. There was cars left, right and centre. And there was a guard there called John Murphy. It's an old guard. They called him the Mart Guard. And he prosecuted every car that put a wheel on the footpath across where the post office is now. Every single car, in the following week, I remember it came out in the Farmers Journal. The Garda prosecutes 40 farmers. Oh, it was pandemonium over it. Needless to say, it never went past our famous judge at the time, Skinner. He threw them all out. Said men have to do their jobs. That was my first day here. I can remember as clear as anything, coming from a city out into the country and seeing all these cars. I thought like it was the busiest place in Ireland. And of course the next day we got up, there was nothing moving. you were asking there about the barracks. There was at least 9 people sleeping in the barracks at any one time. And if there was a row or trouble or a bad accident or anything like that, within minutes you could have 5 or 6 fellas in uniform out dealing with it, you know. Now you don't live here at all. Like, we had some terrible crimes back in the 80s. We had the bank robbed at least 3 times. The post office, funny enough, wasn't touched. We had the bank strike, where we had the army lads out here on duty every single day. And there was like a guard and an armed soldier sitting in post office lane. There's a restaurant there now, I can't think of the name of it, just beside the old post office. There was a lane in the back there that you would go into Bunny Rahali's, the back of Bunny Rahali's as well.
Prime 74.
Prime 74, that's it, yeah. Well, that was where we sat in the coldest of weather when the bank strike went on, because the post office was the only place that was actually cashing people's checks and looking after money.
Would there be rows in the pubs, or what was the? Because there was a lot of pubs in the town at the time.
Policy that time, closing time was 11:30, so the guards went out and they closed the pubs. And what did you do? You put 300 or 400 people out onto the street, one fish and chip shop, Franco Matti's, and there was going to be rows. You'd be pulling and dragging and putting fellas into the car. I can remember Pat O'Donnell. Pat was here for years. He came from Fermoy, or came from Fines. But I can remember he drove down in the patrol car when the row was going on, and fellas were handing the prisoner to him. He was putting him into the car. Someone said to him afterward, like, you're at to put 5 fellas into the back of that car. Like, where are they? They were getting out the far door and running down the hill. So he tackled this fella that was getting out, and it ended the row. It was a great thing. He tackled your man, and the 2 of them rolled off down Bridge Street. Nearly down as far as the Abbey School at that time, you know. And of course, everyone broke their sides laughing, and the whole thing broke up. And it was a fairly serious row that was going on. I suppose one of the major things was the bank robbery of the IB in the 80s. I can't think of the year, but a group of Sierra and Sinn Féin took over the town virtually. They had 4 people went into the bank, 2 people stayed outside, and we were getting ready to go to the races in the junction when it happened. And as it turned out, we had a car with armed men in it, gone to the junction, but they couldn't get back with the traffic. So Joe Quinn, Sean Moore and myself went down to the thing, and of course they opened fire on us, and we fired a few shots back at it. It broke it up, but it was the first time that they were caught. They were caught the following morning in Killaloe. That time the guards escorted the post office vans, and 2 guards got out to go to the loo on the way back into Killaloe, and there was 2 fellas sleeping down by the bank of the river. So they went down to check it, and guards being guards that time, and they found them. They had £6,000 or £7,000 stuffed in their pockets and 2 guns. So they brought them in, and we successfully prosecuted 2 of them. 2 more went off to South America, never came back. But it was a horrifying thing. I fired shots at the fellas, and they fired shots at me. There was a hole in the wall for a long time up near the toilets, and fellas used to be going up with a barrow sticking it in, you know, and they go down to where I fired a shot, and you could peel it off the wall. It was a lead bullet, you know. These fellas were firing German-made Manilika rifles, and they knew their businesses. They had Tony Merrigan and a lad called John Dunn lying on the ground with guns to their heads, so we had to back off. And you know, there was a huge crowd of people gathered around. Oh, yeah. One of the shots from our guns hit a fella's wheel of his car. He told us about 6 months later he was outside, and there was a dent in the chrome of the wheel where the bullet had hit, And there must have been 200 people watching it, you know. Being a guard at that time had disadvantages because lots of people, the old times were still, like James O'Donoghue and John Murphy and Deneen and all these fellas. These were all the guards came here in the 30s. You know, and they were the guards that took over from the 1922 guys.
Oh, yeah.
And they lived here, they all lived here, they all had houses. I know all their houses around town. And the superintendent, they came here and got shot curtain. And then Michael, what you call him, came as superintendent for about 20 years, I'd say. Lived out Dundrum Road.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one story before I go. We used to have the outside batten, but they did away with it because it looked bad with people. So they gave us a big long pocket in the pants. You slid the batten down into it. Very few of us ever carried battens. My father was a sergeant in charge inside William Street in Limerick, second biggest station in the country. And he was 6'7", like he didn't need a baton because he'd push you over with his finger. But he was in there one night and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I went to collect him on my way home from Tipperary. And this fella came in, Larry Wren. He became commissioner later. He came in and he lined them all up. He wanted to know who was this fellow with, you know, we had the separated collars. He wanted to know who was this fellow without a collar, you know. So I kind of fiddled my way out. But he went along the line of all the guards that were on and he checking their pockets for battens. Another of them had a baton. He came to my father and, look at that, he said, the biggest man in the place carries his baton. You know, it's an example to all of you. It wasn't the baton at all. My father had gone up to get the Sunday papers and it all rolled up and shoved down the bottom.
Oh my God.
Now we can shut up now.
That's wonderful, Mick. Thank you so much. Now I want to welcome Anne Allen. Can you tell us a little bit about Tipperary in the 1960s, Anne?
Well, in the early 60s, Tipperary, and through the 60s, Tipperary was a very vibrant town. It was a great retail town, market town. And Market Yard itself was full of all sorts of industry. You could buy anything from ducks and chickens and little bonnets, and then up in the market they had everything you could think of in all the different stalls that they'd bring with their wares. And down the town then of course you had the whole place. The shops were vibrant, they all had their own customers, plenty of staff working in the shops. There was full employment. There was the lino factory, and then you had 7-Up was only starting at that. The Kileys, what would have been rest his soul, Billy Kiley was after getting the franchise for the 7-Up, and that was a big thing. That was very vibrant. And Kiley's Bakery. And the glove factory was still working then. And of course, Harkin Fitzgerald, he had all the shops. I worked in Unstad at one stage. And then I went up to Kirby's, and from there I opened up, I was in Costigans as well, I opened up my own shop.
Right. What year kind of would you have opened your own shop?
I opened that in 1987.
Okay, the Veil of Health.
Then of course the demise came, I would say, when the factories started to go. I mean, the 60s was a great time with all the dance halls. That was a great memory. Going to Drumkeen and the Tower Ballroom was still going. And all those show bands, and for walking up and down the street would be thronged back in those days, and a great buzz, and pubs everywhere. And Drum Mines, of course, in the early 60s contributed a lot to this.
Did they give good employment, Anne?
They
Was there
did.
a good lot of
They
people
did,
working there?
yeah, and then they worked hard, so they came in and they kept the pubs going, and that was the start of the 60s, was the start of the singing pubs.
Good there.
Poor Nellie, Mary Jo and Nellie O'Brien, so I'm sure she'd be very happy to see her name continued on. I have a photo of the singing pub. She won the singing pubs and she was delighted with that. The miners used to keep her going. Mrs. Murray would be above and looking out the door, and Nellie would have the music playing. What has she down there tonight?
She didn't quite
What kind
approve.
of a circus has she down there tonight?
Oh, right.
And sure, Nellie was raking it in. The Bain pubs were run by Nellie and Norrie below at the bottom, and Nellie up at the top. And yeah, Judy Lennon was another one that had her pub. Yeah, women did run those pubs well, and you had the knitwear, the O'Donoghues, rest their soldiers, they're all the Miss Mahers. You could get anything there, Mrs. O'D. I don't mean not to be leaving anyone out, but they're the ones that are, one is triggering the other.
Yeah.
And sure, Miss Mackey ran, well, Woolworths as it was then, because she'd come from the army. Yeah. And she was a retired army person. I can't remember what her rank was.
Right. And of course, Mrs. Murnan.
Mrs. Murnan, yeah, sure, you get anything there. And I think Dick O'Brien's was probably run by women as well. And Crowley's, all the lovely clothes shops.
And then if we needed something to wear, we came to the Black Rock.
The Black Rock was the department store where you could get drapery. And my late husband and the late Dennis Leahy, that's the father of Dennis now that has the pub, they worked together in the made-to-measure department. And Sean was renowned, my late husband was renowned for measuring suits. He'd measure it exactly to the T. Willie Canaan worked there also with them. I think he'd be doing the same thing. There was haberdashery then, and there was girls in the office, and then there was the ladies' department downstairs, down a bit of the stairs. And haberdashery, ladies' wear, and the made-to-measure was big with the two of them working, and there would have been a manager there as well. Sean came there from his late father, Pat Allen, got ill, and he came down. I think he'd been, well, I'd say he was in the Black Rock in Galway where he served his time. Oh yes, and he went from that to England and then came back to the Black Rock in Tipperary.
And of course, your husband served on the Urban Council as well.
Before he got sick, but then of course, he was there from 1955, I think, until he died. That length, he went in 1955 for the council. But that was it was as big a shop now on the scale of it then as you'd get anywhere now. You could equate it to any department store. It was well run.
And surprisingly now, because people might have not know that you served on the district council, the urban council.
Oh, well, that was after my husband's death. Yes, I was.
Yeah. What years were you there in?
I was there from 84 to 85. I think I was co-opted by the Fianna Fáil party, and then I went myself after that. I was there until 1999.
Oh, very good. That's lovely, Anne. Thank you so much. Now I want to welcome Justin McCarthy. Justin, you were born and bred in Tipperary Town and you've lived here all your life. I presume you attended the monastery and then later became a teacher there.
I certainly did, Mary Ellis, yes, except for the 2 years that I spent in college, in teacher training college in Mary I in Limerick. I have lived my entire life in town and unusually in the same house. Our house in Morgasty was fortunately enough very close to the Tipperary Hills, so I suppose that was my first playground, and extending that then into the Furry Hills, which unfortunately is now no more. So we had great fun there, but most of my younger days would have been spent down on the main street, where my mother had a wool shop. It was 9 Main Street. Now, just to give you a kind of a picture of where 9 Main Street might be positioned nowadays, and I'm going to kind of compare and contrast, if you like. I'm going to go back to the 1960s with the present day. And we started a shop that everybody would know, which is Wellworths. Wellworths was Woolworths in my youth, and I recently opened Woolworths at that stage. Next door to that, you had Dinny Murray's grocery at the front, pub at the back, which is now the kebab zone. Next door to that, you had Con Brian's butcher shop, which is now, or was, Liz's Bar up to relatively recent times. And then there was an archway which no longer exists, actually, if you're looking at that section of the main street now, which gave access into the back of Woolworth's and also into the back of Murray's Pub and into the back of our shop, which came next then, so that's number 9. Next door to ours was Harney's, a shop that sold, amongst other things, tobacco. And at the rear of Harney's was a beautifully appointed barber shop run by Liam O'Grady's father, whose son went on to being a barber in town and whose grandson is currently barbering in town. So to go back to number 9, it was bequeathed to my father, Jimmy McCarthy, by his uncle John, who had run the premises up to that time, and it was grandiosely known as the knitting factory. So when my father then took it over, this would have been in 1950, he ran it as a wool shop. But as well as being a wool shop, he kind of sold all the accessories like knitting needles, sewing threads, embroidery sets. And as well as that, oddly enough, some religious items, prayer books, rosary beads, rosettes. Yes, my father died in 1955. 2 years before that, he had married my mother, so it was a very short-lived wedding. And I was born in 1953, so I was short of 2 years old when he died. So my mother continued running the shop as a wool shop. Oh, she also took on Prescott's Cleaners and Dyers, which was a Waterford City company that they would call once a week and they would collect whatever clothes that had been left in by customers during the preceding week. The stuff would be taken away to Waterford City, cleaned and pressed there, and then brought back the following week. Mam gave up the business in the mid-60s due to, I suppose, changes in people's expectations or what they were looking for. And it was bought by a company called RTV Rentals. While I was there as a very young child, the main street became a playground of sorts, I suppose, as well. Now, the street was very busy. Like the footfall that you had on the main street at that point was quite, and not just the main street, a lot of the side streets had thriving businesses as well. Unlike today, where business has really shrunk back. But we played on the street. Traffic was nothing like it was or is now. Whatever cars, lorries, they seem to be very slow moving and infrequent. I do recall a lot of horses and carts on the street. Abiding memory of a gentleman called Dom Luby, who used to live up in Patrick's Avenue. He worked over in the railway station, which was a thriving business also at the time. And he had, well, one of a number, but he's the memory I have of driving these powerful horses up Bridge Street Hill, pulling a dray. Now, a dray was kind of a big, flat, low trailer, and it had no sides. And all the goods that had been delivered, if you like, to the railway station were piled up on this. And he travelled around the town delivering them to all the premises. The other horse-powered transport that I do remember, because it just happened twice a day, was the rubbish bin coming to collect. Yes, and that was a kind of a specially designed cart. I remember it had kind of lids either side and you could shove them up and in went the rubbish and the horse went off again to the next shop. And another memory I have of the main street, outside of the absence of cars and lorries and the presence of horses and carts, was that either side of the main street, if you wanted to cross the street, the curbs on both sides would have been lined with bicycles. People used the pedal of the bike to prop the bike upright. So you kind of had to step over a bike in order to get across to the other side. Rather surprising, you know. So obviously there was an awful lot of bicycles in town. If we left the main street, it was very often down Bridge Street we went as a gang, in under the bridges of the River Ara, with our jam jars and our welly boots. We didn't call it, I have no childhood memories of ever calling it the River Ara. It was always the Green River. And that was because of the proximity of it to the Fair Green. Yeah, over in the Fair Green we played there. And that area now, if people wouldn't be familiar with, would be where the two Kelly brothers have their businesses. Slightly further on, and which is currently property of the creamery, was a rather large sawmills. So there used to be large trees, very, very big trunks of trees used to be stored there. And it was the most wonderful playground for playing on and under. Health and safety not being a major issue, obviously, at the time. So yeah, there was great fun there. And further on then onto the railway station, which, as I mentioned already, was a hive of industry and activity, passenger-wise and goods-wise. The railway gates were wonderful because the signal man above would actually allow you to step onto the edge of the gate. And the nearer to the middle, the better, because you got a bigger swing.
Oh.
And back and forth on the opening and on the closing. I don't think somehow that would be permitted nowadays.
And have I reason to believe that you escaped up to Woolworths on occasion?
Oh, you heard that little tale. Yeah, I'd say I was probably only maybe 3 or 4, as 3 or 4 year olds are inclined to do. I used to wander up to Wellworths. Now, Wellworths was like a treasure chest of all kinds of everything, from sweets to toys, particularly the toys, and everything was kind of accessible, which was unusual because all shops at that time had a counter and everything was behind the counter. But Wellworths, you could trot in and see everything at a high level almost. And I had been known, I can't remember this, but my mother used to enjoy telling the story, that I would help myself to various toys, and I'd arrive back down to the shop with this glorious lorry or whatever it might be, and of course I'd be promptly marched back up again with said toy to return it to the manager at the time, and for a long time was Miss McKay, who I always considered to be a very formidable lady anyway. But yes, all toys were returned.
Forthwith and immediately.
Exactly.
I must say a sincere thank you, Justin. That has evoked many memories, not alone for myself, but I hope for our listeners. Great welcome to Patricia O'Brien, Patricia Brown as we would know you, from Cannon Hayes Park, area of the town. You're going to tell us a little bit about growing up in the town, about your family.
Well, I was born in Cannon Hayes Park in 1963. My family moved up there, I'd say around 1960 when they got the house. They lived before that on Davis Street up over the Fitzpatrick printers. There were 7 of them. My mother had 7 up there, and then they got the house, and they moved up. And there was 3. The last 3 were born in Cannon Hayes Park, so it was a beautiful place to grow up in. Plenty of children, because every house had big families. You know, there was 10 of us. There was 10 all the way down along we'll say down to Breslin's, all big families. So they used to say then that the green never had as much grass as it has now because there were so many children out playing on it. You know, the boys used to run, in the summertime, the boys used to run soccer blitz between, even my brothers included, Bun, as John, my brother, but the boys know him as Bun, he was called Bun Brown. He used to run the soccer, and between, you know, the other end of the town, or Lacey's Villa, you know, they'd all have their little teams. The girls then used to play tennis, and we used to play marbles. French skipping, and if we hadn't somebody, a second person, we'd put the elastic around the lamppost, play there. Then my father worked in the liner factory, so he used to bring us home rope, a big long rope, and we'd play on the streets till all hours skipping. We used to go up to the hills at times, but more often than not we weren't allowed up there, you know. But we used to sneak home that way from school. We used to play in the Plan. Then a lot of my friends, they were either in Davitt Street or O'Connell's Road, so we used to play there. And then we had the little place at the side there beside London against the Blossom Field. We used to play in there, and we had a great area at the back of the houses because we had Coleman's Field, and there was a little pond there, and we used to go catching brickines or catching bees with you know, you'd put the little daisies or the dandelions in with your jar and go down and collect whatever bees you could collect. And then across over in Moloney's, I think it's Moloney's field, you go up the Emily Road and go over the wall and down with a Tarzan swing. Every child in Cannon Hills apart from know about Tarzan swing. Do you know, they used to go over there. It was on a big tree and a rope with you know, the tire, and they played many's the time they played over there. Do you know, so there were great times, and we had, as children then, we had how many shops in Cannon Hills Park? 4. So we were never stuck for anything in Cannon Hills Park because you had Bunny Ryan had her shop, Joe Nugent's shop. You had Mrs. Richardson.
And what did they sell?
Everything from bread to butter to tea, sugar, sweets, ice cream. You get your cut luncheon roll, you get your cut corned beef. Yeah, they sold everything. If you're lucky enough to have fightings or tenpence, you could go down and get an ice pop. When you were trying to Joe Nugent's, the boys used to run it, or Kitty used to come out and serve. And Mary Richardson then used to have, when she moved up, she had a fine shop over there. And Bunny Ryan, of course, she had a great shop there. I can't think of the other one. Maybe I'm thinking now of going down to Paddy Ryan Shamrocks. Do you know, that was near as well, and Maudie White's, Nora Pickham's. We'd all of them.
And were they all 3-bedroom houses now? And you had a bathroom?
Yeah, we were 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, and we'll say that was the main room, and you had a little scullery out the back where she used to cook and wash and things.
And had
like
you
that.
television?
We had when I was, we had. You know, everybody had from RTV Rentals.
Yes.
You were rented at RTV Rentals, black and white TV we had.
Two channels.
2 channels, that's all, 2 channels. You know, I used to love Little House on the Prairie. Oh. Yeah, you know, that and the Waltons and all. You know, growing up, I used to love them.
No, and they were good. To school then?
I went to school in St. Joseph's when I was 4. And all the way up along, made great friends there, and I still have. And some of them are still there living around, you know, still good friends. And then I went to St. Anne's and did my leaving cert then. And then I went working full-time in Harkin Fitzgerald's, but I had been working there since I was 14. You know, I went in as a part-timer, got my first job, which you wouldn't get now because you have to be 16, don't you? Or 16.
There's all sorts of regulations.
Yeah, there is now. You have to be over. Is it over 16 or something?
I think so. And you have limited hours.
Limited hours. Yeah. Well, I was 13. Yeah. In the fruit and veg shop, they were. Do you know where Julie's shop is now?
Yes.
Yeah, in their Cummins's. They had a little fruit and veg shop there, and I got my first part-time job there. That first year, I think I was only in first year. And the second year, then I went down.
Of course, people went to work very early then, didn't they?
They did, but children could.
Yeah,
teenagers could. You could get a part-time job at that time.
Getting the bit of money, of course, was a great help.
It was, but it helped out too because, you know, like I couldn't keep it all. You know, like my children would laugh at me today, but when I get my wages on a Friday from below in Harkins, we'd you go home. And I remember myself and some of the girls, we'd steam open the envelope and we might take out 50 pence and change what was written on it and go up to the Alpine Grill and we might get some onion rings and chips. Do you know, we think we were great. You did, you handed it over. You know, and they'd give you back some. If you said to them,
did you live at home then?
I did,
when
I did, until I got married. I lived and worked at home, worked below in the office in Harkin Fitzgerald's and lived at home with my mother and father, you know, and then bought the house next door and hopped the wall when we got married then. So I'd say I must be one of the longest living in Cannon Hills Park anyway.
Well, we won't say the oldest, but the longest.
The longest living that never moved out of that. Yeah, never moved out of there, yeah. And there was plenty for youngsters to do when we were growing up, you know, and get involved in the Girl Guides. I'd say that's where I got my love of hiking and walking, you know, because the Girl Guides, we were part of the Girl Guides when we were teenagers, and plenty to do with them. They'd take us off on hikes and take us camping, and, you know.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for sharing those memories of the town with us and your growing up there.
Thank you very much.
Now, Nuala Gleeson, you're very welcome to share some of your memories of growing up in Tipperary town and what you might like to share with us, the listeners.
Thanks, Mary Alice and Jim. I grew up in St Patrick's Avenue. I was one of 9 children born to Tom and Noreen Cronin. 2 children were stillborn boys, and they're buried above in St John's Family Graveyard. The St Patrick's Avenue houses were built around 1939, and my mother grew up in that house and was there until she got married. And then they moved to Balcastine houses, and in 1945-46 moved into St Patrick's Avenue. And there was about 64 houses in Patrick's Avenue, and a few years later there was a few more added. And we had 4 shops when I was growing up. One was down the front avenue, as we call it, and it was Hearn's shop. And then up in the top avenue we had Mullins's, and in the back avenue we had Bobby Luce's and Bobby Daly's. And then a huge part of our childhood was the grotto in St Patrick's Avenue, which was erected in 1954, and it was erected by Hugh John Wade. And it was a huge part of our lives in the month of May.
The Marion year.
In the Marion year, yeah. The year I was born, actually. And Una Dunn, in the month of May, we would have the rosary at the grotto, and we would decorate with flowers, and grotto was a huge part of our lives. The characters that used to come to the avenue that we adored was our milkman, PJ O'Halloran, and Jimmy Black, huge part of it. And you'd get the milk fresh every day. There was no pasteurised milk in that time, and the cream was so thick, we used to love it. And there was no measurements, I can tell you. Then Paddy Debricks was our postman. Paddy was a huge part of our lives growing up. And when my sister emigrated to America in 1960, he came up the avenue and he was shouting, and he said, "God, Kathleen Cronin's only in America 2 weeks and she's sending dollars home." And Paddy then, he used to get a little bit of cross sickness of a Monday morning, so he'd say to my father would say, "Go in there to Nor," my mother Noreen, my father used to call her Nor, "and she'll give you a bottle of Dana for the cross sickness." And we'd end up delivering the post for Paddy around the avenue. How times have changed. And then I
presume our listeners will know what cross sickness is.
I hope they do.
Explain, Nuala.
Well, I suppose somebody had too much to drink the night before, and Paddy used to have a little bit of that. We adored Paddy Debricks, and it was a huge part of our lives, and we'd end up delivering the post for Paddy. And then we had our paperman, who was Dinny Mulcahy, so Twin Mulcahy we used to call him because they were twins there, obviously, and he delivered the paper every single morning at Cockrell. He was a lovely, lovely man. And then our breadman was Vinnie Bohan, who delivered the bread daily, and my favourite thing was the grinders, of course, and we'd be all fighting over the crusty on the grinder. And then our fishman was Georgie Price, he used to come. And then we had the ragman. The ragman was a very important man. He'd come and we'd go looking for old clothes and things, and then he'd come up with his little van and you'd get a little gift. It could be a copybook, or it could be pencils or crayons or some little thing that would make a noise, and we used to love the ragman coming. And then our vegetable, we had Peter Cummins from Ballahurst, my neighbour, who would turn out to be my neighbour after that. And then we had the Spider Heffernan. Can't think of his first name, but we used to call him Spider Heffernan. He lived out the Drumline Road. So they were there all through our lives growing up. And then of course we had the Hills. The Hills is my favourite place in the whole world, and we were so lucky and privileged as kids to have the Hills growing up. And there was Ghoulies, the Long Meadow, we had the Sandpit, Cup and Saucer, Mutton Pie, St John's Family Graveyard, and of course Michael Edmonds. He was killed in the 13th of December 1920 by Crown forces and we used to be fascinated with his grave there because Our Lady is inside in it, and we used to think Our Lady will come out and talk to us, the statue of Our Lady there. So we used to spend a lot of time looking at that, and then walking around St. John's graveyard, the walls as children. That was a huge part of our lives. And then of course sliding down Mutton Pie Hill, and then we used to play rounders there in the hills, and we used to have stone throwing games against the new road, the avenue against the new road, and it used to be, honest to God, it was absolutely brilliant. You had Julie Dwyer, Sue Hannon and all that gang. And then we had the camogie games. Now I didn't actually play camogie because I was one of the younger girls, but they did play the camogie teams against the town leagues, and my mother, if as a prize, she would pick a few of the carnations or whatever flowers, they're usually carnations, and she'd put a bit of tin foil around them and she'd give it as a prize. We learned to play poker under the lamppost in St. Patrick's Avenue and at the Stile, and there was great poker players. Din Mulcahy, our paperman, was great. Mick McCarthy, Tommy Power, Tony Jackson, Paddy Egan, they were all pure sharks at the poker. And then we played the skittles as well down at the Stile. And then we used to swing on the poles. We put our ropes on the poles, swing around the poles and the gates. So we could never close our gates after it, I can tell you, because they were worn out. And then the marbles were a huge part. And Paddy Egan, my next door neighbour, he was absolutely brilliant marbles. And we also played pidgeots, and we also played with the conkers as well when that time of year came around. And they were great people. They cut down clothes, post office clothes were cut down for the boys. My mother knitted, crocheted, so everything was done by hand.
Recycled,
yeah,
upcycled.
Yeah, upcycled, and then you were looking forward to the parcels coming from America with all these lovely clothes and dresses, you know.
Thanks very much, Nuala. They're absolutely lovely memories that you've shared with us.
Now I want to welcome Fiona Pilkington, Fiona Fitzgerald that was. Will you share some of your early memories with us, Fiona?
Well, Mary Alice, I arrived into Tipperary on the fast track because I should have been scheduled. I was scheduled for arriving in Dublin in a nursing home there. My mother was booked in, but 1947 was the year of the big snow, and every place was covered, including Tiptown. So there was no journey made except up to Nurse Ryan's there on Market Street, and I arrived. They were delighted with me. First girl after 3 boys. My father was over the moon. And we moved in that time to Kickham Place number 2. And my father had bought this building where he could have his family upstairs. So he had this little grocery shop downstairs. And we lived there for 10 years.
Your grandmother, did your grandmother live with you?
Yeah, she lived upstairs with us, my mum and my dad. And there were 7 of us born and lived there at that time. We didn't have a toilet in the house. We had a toilet in the yard below, and there was the coal area, and there was a bit for blocks be thrown in there.
Did you have any garden?
No garden at all. It was just a yard. And so we used that outside toilet, and as soon as there was enough money, my father had a toilet built into the roof space, and it had the best view of the Galties. And you know, every day we had chores to do when you woke up in the morning. By the way, when we woke in the morning, there was my parents had a radio on in their room, and there was a speaker into the children's room, and it started off with the Pips getting everybody ready and into gear for the day. So the Pips came on, and then followed by that signature tune, Donna LeBou, right, and there followed the news and all of that.
So that got us up and ready for the day. You know, stirring the porridge, all the stuff that you had to do. The pots had to be emptied as well, and everybody was just running around the place looking for school books, you name it, to get themselves out on the road to school. So I was 4 when I went up and had my first day at school above in the convent. And at the top was a nun, and she was at a big desk. She had this long stick, and she kept demonstrating how if any child was bold, that stick would be able to come down to them. And it was a big long one. And she tapped people to show this, that she had access without leaving the desk. So also in that first day, I had been appointed the person with the responsibility to go over to this covered bin that was full of sawdust, and you had a little scoop, and I did exactly what I was told. I was to go around, and if any of the little people who had arrived here together were over frightened and had wet the floor, I was to keep an eye out so that I could shake the sawdust over it, and everybody could remain in their place until later on. Then I'm sure somebody else came in to clean up, to check over. So we were to learn reading, writing, talking Irish, sums, singing tables, and saying prayers. So that began my formal education. Yeah, that first communion was absolutely wonderful. All dressed in white, all the girls dressed in white, and matching handbags. You know, only mothers had handbags up to that point, so we had the matching handbags and the veil, and you know, the prize that we could rattle around inside in our handbags at the time was half a crown, and they were just wonderful coins. The going rate at the time was 8 to £1. But listen, if you had one of those inside in your little white bag, you were rocking. You were rocking. So that was communion. Yeah, but that May as well. It was very exciting because we had all the gear on us, all the first communion things, and May was the month of the processions. So all the girls had starring roles in it, that year's communion class, and we were given baskets, and we could walk along in front of this statue of the Blessed Virgin, and she was covered in a canopy, and there were men or very big boys in surplice and soutanes, and they carry this on their shoulder. We had petals, and we would throw them out ahead. Well, you couldn't have a more starring role than this. And we went downtown. The procession went downtown, and then it came back up again to the church. Started the church, went downtown, and came back up again. Yeah, the cinema was a fantastic attraction, a fantastic draw for kids. Even running up there, up the steps, the Excel, having a look at who was on the board, who was coming, whether it looked a real exciting poster that you thought you saw all the highlights there in that one poster, and you ran home to tell what was on to see if there was any chance of you going. And of course, George Larby, he was the major domo, and he was there in all his regalia and his epaulets and his stance and peaked cap, like you'd see outside an American apartment building for all, or a hotel on Fifth Avenue or something. But he held the power, and if he thought you were going to create a problem, he prevented you from going in. And if he thought you did create a problem inside, he tossed you out. And, you know, his word was law. Whereas just when I'm up there by the Excel and the Gaiety there in the Tower Ballroom, of course, that's where our parents went to dance, because they had, Mulcahy with the big bandstand that came from Clonmel. And all of that, it was all the time of the Glenn Miller in the 40s there. And, you know, the parents,
very glamorous.
very glamorous, yeah. There was lots of sequins, and there was, you know, red lipstick and very sharp red fingernails and high heels, and it was such a glamorous event. They had great times, and, you know, they were there still at 5 a.m. The very same ones who told us we'd want to be in at 10.
Fiona, that's a wonderful glimpse into what was another era, a time of innocence, a time of... So now we have Annemarie O'Dwyer, or Annemarie Fitzgerald, who was born and raised in 12 Old Abbott Street, or Blind Street in Tipperary Town. Will you tell us a little bit, Annemarie?
My name's Annemarie, and I was raised in Blind Street, Old Abbott Street, as my dad used to like to call it. He was born and raised there as well. A family of 5 children. My dad worked for the Evanses most of his life. He was a kind of labourer stroke handyman or caretaker, and he worked throughout their houses and in the cinema and in the theatre. My uncle worked in the lino factory. Daddy had some great stories about the working with the Evanses at the time. One of them I remember was, he said that himself and old Edgar Evans went to Dublin to look at the Gaiety Theatre in Dublin, because they wanted to see how the stage worked, because they really wanted to commit to doing a really good job of a proper theatre in Tipperary Town. So they came down then and looked, and they really, really put a lot of effort, from what I can remember my father telling me, in the old Gaiety Theatre. It was spectacular, and they were very proud of it, and they had lights along the seats and everything. It was really plush, and they were very proud of the stage, and they had many touring performers that were on tour. They had Jimmy O'Day, they had Maureen Potter, they had them all in their time. I think it was in the 50s it kind of opened. They did show pictures there as well, but the theatre was the big thing. They really wanted the Gaiety to be a proper theatre. The Excel was the cinema, which was of course beautiful as well, with the beautiful fountain in the front and stuff. And Daddy, as I said, worked with the Evanses in really all his life up to the mid-70s. And he was also a part-time fireman in Tipperary Town. So he would have attended all the big fires and the hay barns and the different things, and I can remember stories about where they'd head out from the fire station in Churchwell, and they'd get lost, because of course there was no such thing as mobile phones in those days, and they'd have to find a phone and ring in to know where is this fire. But anyway, they'd be up and down the byroads. And then they'd get, from whoever the fire was, they'd have a fine feast of beer and food, and then come home. But one of the big fires I remember was that, and it was very sad for my father, the early hours of the morning he got the call to go when the Gaiety Theatre went on fire. we just lived behind it, so we saw the big fireballs flying over the National School or the community centre as it is now, landing on the roof, and they were even landing on the street in front of our house, like. So all I could do was get my mother. I was trying to make her come and see, like I wanted to go around the corner to see what the fire looked like. And then when I did, there was Daddy up on the ladder, because I think he was one of the only firemen at the time that was brave enough to go off up in ladders. He didn't have any fear or anything. The hose quenching it down. But when he came home, he was so sad after the work they had put into doing this wonderful place.
Was the building destroyed?
Destroyed, totally destroyed. As an end of an era, really, for him.
Of course.
So shortly afterwards, he actually retired from the fire brigade in 1980. That was in 1978, I think. January 78, it went on fire.
And you said your uncle Annemarie worked in the lino factory.
Oh yes, my uncle Henry worked in the lino factory. They'd go off there in the morning with their bikes, and they'd come back at lunchtime for the dinner, and go back again. And of course, sometimes they'd have to pass over the train line, and the gates would be down, and they'd have to lug the big black bikes up over the bridge, would say to get to work or to come to lunch, depending.
They were hardy men.
They were very hardy men. Like my father and my uncle loved fishing, so they would go out. They'd take those bikes again that evening, and off they'd go, like down to Ballycarn or maybe Golden or wherever. Fishing and and spend like maybe till the early hours of the morning, come back and then go to work again that morning. Like but they were big, strong, hardy men. And both, when my uncle was 6'4", my father was 6 foot. They were really strong men, and as born and raised, went to everything here in town and gave it their all.
It was a different way of life. Surely.
Totally different way of life. Totally. Like my father, Lord immerse him now, if he came back, like he'd be lost, even down to like when they were in the fire brigade, there was no safety gear. There was a big hard hat that you could barely carry. It was so heavy. The big eilers, but no breathing apparatus, nothing like that. And they were inside in fairly toxic fumes. But yeah, they were strong people, and they gave it their all. I don't think you see many doing it nowadays. So yeah, that's kind of my story.
That's wonderful, Annemarie, and thank you for sharing that with us. So now we're here with Joe Moloney in Barnestown. Joe, you have many memories of Tipperary town.
I have, Mary Allison. Going way back in my lifetime, I've seen huge changes. Now, first of all, you'd have to say in the rural area and in parts of the town, you had no electricity, you had no regional water. You were talking about the days of the eye lamps. You were talking about the candle and the jam jar for light. And you depended on what they had were storm lamps in the country area. But the changes that I have seen from my time going to school, you had little or no motor traffic.
Okay. Did you go to Tipperary to school?
I started in the convent.
Okay.
I started with the girls in the convent who made our first communion there in 1938, and it coincided with the first instalment of Ireland's President Douglas Hyde. And we were Miss Flynn and the lay teachers there were two, and the nuns at the time. And I have to say that it was a pleasure going there to the convent in those days. You were young, you didn't know better, but we graduated then after that and moved to the old monastery, which is at the famine graveyard site now. It was there inside the walls, And towards our walking to school in those days now, in the early 1940s, we came over in October 1940 from the old monastery to the present monastery. We were one of a few that are left to record that. And the rural area, the farmers and the community living in the rural area, they had their own special grocery shops in the town. And I'm sure it was the same in every other town, where you did your business, you met someone, and if your father or grandfather was with you or grandmother and they wanted to have a little drink on the side in the pub, there was this thing called the snug. And you went in there for privacy and you had your drink, while we youngsters would be waiting or maybe meet some friends out in the street in the meantime. You did your shopping mostly on Saturdays. And in some cases, if you were far away, you only went to town maybe once or twice in the month. And you had what they called the tea chests, and all the provisions were put in by the grocer. And there was a helper or a shop assistant brought that out and put it up in the car for you. And you felt secure for the next week. What I remember then was the established businesses like Blackrock. You had Kelly and Co's, the mineral waters, and you had different mineral waters, 2 or 3 different ones like every town had. And there was a certain amount of employment by for the locals then and all those places. And it was like Kylie's confectionery and Kylie's bread, and you had Nagels, and you had Barlow's, and you had Heafy's, and they had their horse van for delivering around the town and delivering to the local areas. And then when they got motorised, they went out the country and delivered at the crossroads or delivered at farmers' places. They delivered the groceries for them. And there was, I remember one man, he was a Tom Shea. He used to drive for somewhere in the bakeries, and he used to do the road from Cullen here to Tipperary. And that was even during World War II, the commencement of World War II. During the war years, we had the agricultural contracting, which a lot of people, when you talk about compulsory tillage, wouldn't know what you were talking about. Compulsory tillage meant that agricultural inspectors went around the country. There was a man based in town, a Corkman by the name of Con Collins, and he got your land surveyed, what was arable, and it was about, I think the ratio was about 27% of your land. You had to till it whether you liked it or not during World War II. And if you didn't, say supposing health-wise, they would get a next door neighbour farmer or a farmer from some outlying areas to come and contract and rent the gardens for the main cereal crops were wheat, oats and barley, and of course sugar beet, because you had the 4 factories up and running here at that time. Wheat in particular, for to keep bread on the table. Like, a lot of people don't realise, they talk about the famine of 1847-48. We were on the verge, we were young, we didn't know it, but looking back, you were on the verge of another famine at that stage, because imports were affected by World War II, ships were blown up, lives were lost, bringing produce from the different countries, even that we were neutral. There was an excuse always for certain ships that went down, laden with produce, that, oh, they weren't recognisable and all this kind of thing. But we didn't know that at the time, but we did afterwards, that the sweat and blood, so to speak, of the farmers and the workers. And I give you a typical example in 1946, which was in the height of compulsory tillage. It was one of the worst harvests that ever came. And crops were lodged. Machinery was in a transition period from horse to tractor. And in fairness, the people of the towns and the villages were mobilised in their half days and spare time to get out and help to save the crops of 46. And in the cities, you had places like Limerick, and the outlying areas where the army lorries were brought in to carry the workforce. Limerick had a half day on a Thursday, Tipperary had it on a Wednesday, and they were all commandeered to get out. Anyone that was active to give a hand, and they did. And when you look back on it, it was a marvellous community effort. And I'd say people like Canon Hayes, who had founded Moynton Altira, had motivated that spirit like as well. So that saved us in 46. But looking back then to the town, I remember in 1956, the first supermarket was Coleman's. And you had smaller ones like Daly's and those, but Coleman's was the first introduction to supermarket. And people were in a quandary. The first thing was the break from the grocery business, the chat with the grocery man and his staff, whereas this was a different kettle of fish. You went in, you had whatever means, baskets or bags or whatever you had, you picked, and you had to get used to the labelling, that you could arrive home with a bottle of something that should be a bottle of something else.
And Joe, did you deliver milk?
Yes, then I was just coming to that, Mary Alice. My father established, you had to have a registered dairy. A lot of farmers around the town did it because they were paid more for their milk than at the creamery, but it was hard earned. Now, when I tell you that a pint of milk in World War II days was 2p halfpenny a pint in the old money in summertime, 3p to 3p halfpenny a pint for the milk in the winter time. You can make your own calculations. We say in comparison to the money then, we say sterling or whatever you like to call it. Sterling was used as well. You had the English money and the Irish money. It was sustaining, but you had to produce the milk in the winter time, which was more costly. And you also had to stand up to scrutiny with the regulations that were, however primitive, there were regulations. An inspector could arrive in, and if you hadn't your premises clean and your milk properly produced, not adulterated with water, some have been found out for plenty of water, and you paid a penalty and price for that. And but by and large, people were very good and really extremely honest.
But we're talking unpasteurised milk now.
Unpasteurised,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now that is a frightening experience to be talking in today's world, because when I tell you that unpasteurised, there was what we call the fresh milk, which was the hot milk after milking. The mothers needed that for the babies. You can imagine trying something like that today. And the cold milk, or the night's milk, we say, the stale milk, or there were so many names on it. You made it a point that people that hadn't families or weren't married or living on their own, that was sufficient for them for their needs. You also had, we used to supply Ballycastine stud, where they had dry cattle and mares and foals, and mares or foals that were sick, and naturally the treatment bottle was of the new milk was a remedy for, or a stimulant for the foal to recover. And you had to keep all that in mind. You would have varying kind of customers. Then we supplied the local hotel at the train station, and we supplied the race course on race days, where they would take so many gallons of milk for their restaurant. It wasn't a restaurant, but I know what they call it, an eating house or something like that in those days. But it was an experience when you were young. I gave 20 years at it. I started at the age of 10 and a half with a horse and car and a local man driving me, and got to know how to give back the change, and that was often a bit of a tight now with the pound, shillings and pence.
Did you go door to door?
Yes, door to door.
Yeah.
Your horse and car for the the emergency, and then after the emergency in 1951 we got motorised in a van, which was a huge improvement, hygienic wise as well. You weren't open to the elements, especially in bad weather, and you were open on a door-to-door basis. The local milk inspector would arrive behind you with 2 bottles and take sample of your milk. He'd keep one and you were supposed to keep the other until such a length of time, I forget how many hours. And if your milk wasn't right, they came out to inspect the sample that they gave you as well. And naturally it would correspond, like if it wasn't right with them, it wasn't right with you. But you were open to that, and cleanliness, hygiene. You had to have a shop coat in those days delivered. Remember the kind of a khaki colour coat, and you were subject that you had long nails and dirty nails, and that your hands were, you were very much exposed to loose milk, as it was called in those days. It was a great experience, and with the horse then, the horse learned from experience. He would put on from door to door ahead of you while you'd be going in, and it was, the milk was either in a gallon hanging on a door or an up and down window. There was a bowl inside. You'll be delivering the milk that the people mightn't be up on certain mornings of the year. And there was also, it was very variant, needless to say, and you had a bond with the customers that on Grand National Day and Derby Day, they'd be expecting you that when you'd be going to the creamery, whatever milk you would have left at home, that you put on the bits for them for the Grand National.
Oh Lord, you were double jobbing, Joe.
And another thing, Mary Alice, what was more sensitive was if the woman of the house came out and said, Joe, will you call to Dr. such and such a doctor, whoever their family doctor, Willie or Jack or Jim or whatever his name is not so well, will you tell him to come out? You carried all that. My mother used to say to me at the early stages of it, when I was in my early teens, I'd be coming home telling me what went on. But I'll tell you one thing, I was brought to order, and she says, listen here, you, she says, I want to hear nothing that goes on in anybody's house. And better still, you not to take any news to the next house except it's good news. And of all the virtues that I have, I think today it is the one that still stands out for me. But it was great meeting the people, great to have, especially where young babies and the mothers might come out with the child in their arms. If you were a bit late coming with the milk, they needed the milk. And you remember the bottles, they were like bananas. The baby's bottle, we'll say, it was oval, and there'd be a teat at one end of it and a stopper at the other, and they'd fill it, and they were charmed when you came along with the hot milk. Of course, another very important was regular timekeeping.
Yes.
That you set out, you'd have to be up early, do your milk, and set out at a certain time. You knew how long the delivery was going to take. And the people were expecting you at a certain time. But you could understand the frustration. Maybe they were waiting for their breakfast and hadn't the milk.
Yes.
You see, there were no fridges. You had no facility for keeping extra milk if you wanted. It depended on the daily service. So the late Paddy Conway used to be delivering the coal, and you had the paperman, and you had the postman, and you had the milkman. And God be good to Paddy, and he was a very devoted man to his work. He used to say, Joe, when you and I will be gone, he says, I'll be remembered for delivering the black stuff, he says, and you'll be remembered for delivering the white stuff.
That's a perfect end to that story, Joe. That's absolutely wonderful.
You know.
A special word of thanks to all who contributed to this project. James Hayes, Fiona Pilkington, Kathleen Cleary, Mick Murray, Justin McCarthy, Anne Allen, Annemarie O'Dwyer, Patricia O'Brien, Nuala Gleeson, and Joe Moloney Barnstown. To Jim Keane, who recorded and edited the material, a special thank you for your kindness and patience. To Teresa Normal, Knocknrawley Resource Centre, for the great facilities, and again to our funders, Creative Ireland, Tipperary County Council, and Tipperary Revitalisation Task Force.
This project was organised and produced by Mary Alice O'Connor.